Flight attendant breaks black girl's arm, and until her sister's call to so dad grounds the flight. But what that flight attendant did after breaking a 9-year-old's bones will make you question every assumption you've ever made about who gets believed when a child is hurt. Flight attendant Patricia Kowalski's voice cut through the chaos of Meridian Global Airlines Flight 2156 with absolute certainty. She wasn't supposed to be standing. She ran into me. This is her fault for violating safety regulations. These unsupervised kids have been a problem since boarding. The words hit 9-year-old Kennedy Jackson like a second collision. She lay crumpled in the aisle, her left arm bent at an angle that arms should never bend. Both bones in her forearms snapped clean through. Her face was streaked with tears and twisted in agony as she cradled her shattered arm against her chest. And the adult who just crashed into her at full speed while texting wasn't asking if she was okay. Wasn't calling for medical help. Wasn't showing an ounce of concern. She was blaming Kennedy for her own broken bones. And here's what we need to understand about racism in 2025. It's not just alive. It's thriving with new tactics and better camouflage. Back in the civil rights era, at least the hatred was honest and explicit. You knew where you stood with separate water fountains and whites-only signs. Today, racism wears a uniform and carries a badge and speaks in the language of regulations and compliance and your fault. It looks you in the eye while you're injured and bleeding and tells you that you caused your own pain. It documents your suffering as evidence of your guilt. And it's gotten worse because now it has systems and policies and corporate backing to hide behind while it destroys black lives with the same hatred our ancestors faced, just dressed up in professional language that makes it harder to name and harder to fight. 14-year-old Skylar Jackson knelt beside her little sister, trying to comfort her while Kennedy screamed in pain. Around them, Economy Plus passengers recorded everything on their phones. Some looked horrified. Some looked uncomfortable. But not one stepped forward to say, "Wait, I saw what happened." Not one challenged Patricia's version of events. Not one asked why a flight attendant was blaming a child for an injury the adult had caused. Kennedy felt shock and pain radiating from her arm in waves that made her vision blur. But underneath the physical agony was a different kind of hurt. The realization that even with broken bones, even crying on an airplane floor, the first instinct of the white adult who hurt her was to make it her fault. She was 9 years old and this wasn't even the first time. She'd been followed in stores. Watched suspiciously at the pool. Told she was too loud, too aggressive, too much. She'd learned early that being black meant always being suspected first and believed last. But she'd never imagined that lesson would apply even when her arm was literally broken. And if you're watching this without subscribing to this channel that exposes these injustices, it means your complicity in the silence might be part of what lets this injustice continue. Kindly like, share, and subscribe. Patricia pulled aside Marcus, the black flight attendant, her voice low but urgent. These kids have been unsupervised all flights. This is their fault. We need to document that the girl was non-compliant before this becomes a lawsuit. I was doing my job. She violated the seatbelt sign. She ran into me. But I saw it, Marcus said quietly. You were on your phone. You weren't watching where you were going. Patricia's eyes hardened. Are you really going to take their side over mine? Think very carefully about your answer. The scene on Flight 2156 was a nightmare at 30,000 feet. Kennedy Jackson lay in agony while the adult who'd broken her arm built a defense in real time. Her sister Skylar begged passengers for help, for witness statements, for anyone to stand up and say they'd seen Patricia texting and not watching. But the plane full of people with working phones and clear views suddenly had seen nothing, remembered nothing, wanted no involvement. A white businessman too rose up, the same one who'd snapped at Skylar to control her sister after Kennedy's juice spilled during turbulence, spoke up now with absolute confidence. I saw the whole thing. The kid was out of her seat. She was running around. She crashed into the flight attendant. This is what happens when children aren't properly supervised. Patricia seized on his statement like a lifeline. Thank you, sir. That's exactly what I saw too. These girls have been a disruption since Atlanta. My sister has 2 broken bones, Skylar said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. She wasn't running. She was getting napkins because her juice spilled during turbulence and that man yelled at us. And this flight attendant was on her phone and not watching where she was going. How is any of this Kennedy's fault? The seatbelt sign was on, Patricia said, and there was something calculated in the way she positioned herself so the overhead cameras could see her face. Your sister violated a direct safety regulation. I'm very sorry she was injured, but passengers must follow crew instructions. She's 9 years old, Skylar sobbed. She's hurt. Why are you blaming her instead of helping her? The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Flight attendants, we need a status update on the injured passenger. Do we need to divert? Patricia keyed her mic. Captain, we have a minor injury. 9-year-old female passenger. She violated the seatbelt sign during turbulence and collided with me while I was performing safety duties. The injury appears to be to her arm. We're assessing now. Every word was chosen carefully. Minor injury instead of broken bones. She collided with me instead of me crashing into her. Violated the seatbelt sign instead of was getting napkins after a spill. Patricia Kowalski, 18-year veteran of Meridian Global Airlines, knew exactly how to frame a narrative. We need medical assistance when we land in Boston, Patricia continued. But I don't think diversion is necessary at this time. We'll keep monitoring. Kennedy's screams had subsided to whimpers now, her body going into shock, her face pale and clammy. Skylar held her good hand and whispered reassurances while fighting back her own tears. Their grandmother was waiting for them in Boston after her surgery. Their mother was working a double shift at the hospital in Atlanta. And their father, the man they'd been taught to call in emergencies, was the last person Skylar wanted to contact after 2 months of resentful silence. But looking at her baby sister's broken arm, at the flight attendant who was blaming a 9-year-old for her own injury, at the passengers who'd rather record than help, Skylar realized she had no choice. Miss, can I please go with my sister when the paramedics come? Skylar asked Patricia desperately. I'm her guardian on this flight. I can't let her go alone. Patricia's response was delivered with professional courtesy that barely masked contempt. Only a legal guardian can accompany a minor receiving medical treatment. You're 14. That makes you a minor too. Your sister will be transported by medical personnel and met by appropriate adults at the hospital. But she's scared, Skylar begged. Please. I'm all she has right now. Those are the regulations, Patricia said, turning away. I don't make the rules. If you believe no child should ever be blamed for being injured by an adult, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination on airplanes is something we left in the 1960s, you need to see what happens next. And if you've ever been treated like you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now because this story is reaching people everywhere and we need to know we're not alone in fighting this. As paramedics boarded the plane in Boston, Kennedy reached for Skylar with her good hand, her voice small and terrified. Don't let them take me alone. Please, Skylar. I'm scared. I'm sorry, baby, Skylar sobbed. I'm so sorry. I'll be right behind you. I promise. But as Kennedy was carried off the plane screaming for her sister, as Patricia gave her carefully constructed statement to paramedics about a non-compliant child who'd violated safety regulations, as passengers filed past averting their eyes from the blood on the carpet where Kennedy had lain, Skylar pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She hadn't spoken to her father in 2 months. Hadn't returned his calls. Hadn't forgiven him for the divorce, for choosing his career over their family, for not being there when they needed him. But Kennedy needed him now. And Skylar was about to make a call that would ground an entire flight and expose a pattern of discrimination that had been hiding in plain sight for 18 years. The collision happened so fast that most passengers didn't even see it coming. One moment Kennedy was reaching up toward the overhead bin, her small frame wobbling as the plane bucked through turbulence. The next moment Patricia Kowalski came barreling down the aisle at full speed, her eyes on her phone screen instead of watching where she was going, her finger tapping out a text message to someone about dinner plans after her shift. She slammed into Kennedy with the full force of an adult body moving at speed through a confined space. Kennedy's 9-year-old frame, maybe 70 pounds soaking wet, didn't stand a chance. She flew backward like she'd been hit by a truck, her body airborne for a split second before gravity brought her crashing down. The sound of Kennedy's left arm hitting the armrest of row 13 was sickening. A crack that echoed through the cabin loud enough to be heard over the engine noise and the rattling of overhead bins. The kind of sound that makes people's stomachs turn because they know instinctively that bones just broke. Kennedy's scream pierced the cabin, a sound of pure agony that made passengers 3 rows away flinch. It wasn't a cry or a whimper. It was the howl of a child in unimaginable pain, the kind of scream that parents have nightmares about hearing from their children. Kennedy! Skylar lunged from her seat into the aisle, her debate notes scattering as she dropped to her knees beside her baby sister. "Oh my God, Kenny, I'm here. I'm here." Kennedy lay crumpled on the industrial carpet, her left arm bent at an angle that arms should never bend. Both bones in her forearm had snapped clean through, the radius and ulna fractured so severely that her arm looked wrong even through her sleeve. She clutched it against her chest with her good hand, hyperventilating, her face contorted in agony, tears and snot streaming down her face as she gasped for air between screams. Skylar's hands shook as she tried to comfort her sister without touching the injured arm. It's okay, help is coming, you're gonna be okay," she repeated like a prayer, though she had no idea if any of that was true. Patricia scrambled to her feet from where she'd fallen after the impact, dazed, her phone skittering across the floor. She looked down at Kennedy writhing on the carpet, and instead of dropping to help, instead of calling for medical assistance, instead of showing an ounce of concern for the child she just injured, her face hardened with something that looked like calculation. "She wasn't supposed to be standing," Patricia said, her voice sharp and accusatory, loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear clearly. The seatbelt sign was on. What was she doing out of her seat? Skylar looked up at Patricia with tears streaming down her face, disbelief mixing with her terror. "She's 9. She was scared. The turbulence scared her. Help her." But Patricia's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder as she looked at Kennedy's brown skin, at Skylar's braids, at these 2 black girls who were now a problem she needed to manage. "She ran into me," Patricia insisted. "I was doing my job, walking the cabin during turbulence to check on passengers. She violated safety regulations by being out of her seat." From seat 11D, the white businessman who'd snapped at Skylar earlier spoke up, his voice carrying authority. "I saw it. The kid was out of control. She wasn't in her seat. She ran right into the flight attendant." Several passengers turned to stare at him, some with expressions that suggested they'd seen something very different. But he'd spoken first and spoken with confidence, and in that moment, his version started to solidify as truth for those who hadn't been paying close attention. Kennedy continued to scream, the sound becoming hoarse now, her body going into shock. Her arm was swelling visibly, the skin tight and discolored. She needed immediate medical attention. She needed ice and elevation and pain medication. She needed adults to stop arguing and start helping. But Patricia was already constructing her narrative, already building her defense, already deciding that protecting herself mattered more than caring for an injured child. And she was making that calculation based at least in part on the color of Kennedy's skin, on assumptions about black children being out of control, on prejudices she'd carried for 54 years and 18 years in this job. This is what systemic racism looks like when it wears a uniform, when it has authority, when it decides that a 9-year-old girl with broken bones is a liability to be managed rather than a child to be protected. Skylar held Kennedy's good hand and sobbed, feeling utterly powerless, watching her baby sister suffer while the adult who'd caused this injury stood above them making excuses instead of offering help. And every passenger who'd pulled out their phones to record was capturing this moment. The collision, the screaming, the accusations, the blame placed on a child lying injured on the floor. They were documenting everything, but not one of them was stepping forward to contradict the businessman's false account. Not one was demanding that Patricia stop defending herself and start helping Kennedy. Not one was using their voice or their privilege or their presence to protect 2 black girls who desperately needed adults to stand up for them. They just recorded, watched, stayed silent. Marcus, the black flight attendant who'd been so kind during boarding, came rushing from the forward galley with the medical kit, his face showing genuine alarm when he saw Kennedy on the floor. "Oh God," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. Okay, sweetheart, I'm here. I'm going to help you. Can you tell me where it hurts? My arm, Kennedy gasped through sobs. My arm, it hurts so bad. Marcus examined the injury without touching it, his expression growing more concerned. We need ice, we need elevation, and I'm calling for any doctors on board right now. He reached for the PA system control. But Patricia grabbed his arm, stopping him. Her voice was low but urgent as she pulled him slightly away from the girls. Marcus, she hissed. These kids have been unsupervised all flight. The older one couldn't control her sister. This is their fault, not ours. We need to document that the girl was non-compliant with safety regulations before this becomes a lawsuit against us. Marcus stared at her, horror and disbelief written across his face. Patricia, she's a child in agony. We need to help her, not build a case against her. Patricia's eyes were hard. She's a liability, Marcus. And I'm not losing my pension over some kid who doesn't follow the rules. Now are you going to back me up or make this difficult? The choice she was giving him was clear. Be complicit in blaming Kennedy, or face consequences for not supporting a senior colleague. It was the kind of moment where doing the right thing could cost him his job, where speaking truth to power meant risking everything. And in that moment, with Kennedy screaming on the floor and Skylar sobbing beside her and passengers recording everything, Marcus had to decide what kind of person he was going to be. But before he could answer, Patricia turned back to Skylar, her voice cold and loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear clearly. Where are your parents? Why are two children flying alone without proper supervision? This never would have happened if... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Everyone understood what she was implying. That black children flying without white supervision were a problem. That this injury was somehow the fault of inadequate parenting. That Kennedy's broken arm was the natural consequence of letting these kinds of kids travel alone. A white woman in seat 13B, who'd witnessed the whole thing and could clearly see Patricia had been on her phone and not watching, spoke up with visible anger. That's not fair. The turbulence hit and you weren't watching where you were going. I saw you on your phone. Patricia snapped at her without even looking. Ma'am, please stay out of this. This is an airline matter. The woman looked like she wanted to argue further but fell silent under Patricia's glare, another potential ally choosing comfort over courage, another witness deciding that defending these girls wasn't worth the confrontation. Kennedy continued to sob on the floor, her arms swelling grotesquely now, the pain so intense she was starting to go pale and clammy, her body's shock response kicking in to protect her from the full extent of the trauma. Finally, a man 3 rows back stood up. I'm a pediatrician. Patricia hesitated for just a moment, as if considering whether to assert her authority over a doctor. But the man's tone brooked no argument, and she stepped aside. He knelt beside Kennedy and immediately began a careful assessment, speaking to her in calm, soothing tones even as his face showed concern at what he was seeing. Sweetheart, I'm Dr. Chin. I'm going to look at your arm very carefully without touching it, okay? You're being so brave. Kennedy nodded through her tears, trusting the stranger because he was the first adult besides her sister who'd shown her genuine care since the collision. Dr. Chin looked up at Marcus. This child needs immediate emergency transport. Both forearm bones are broken, possibly compound fractures. We need to immobilize this, get ice on it, and get her to a trauma center as soon as possible. While Kennedy writhed in pain, while Skylar held her hand and whispered reassurances through tears, while Dr. Chin worked to stabilize the injury with supplies from the medical kit, Patricia Kowalski was already constructing a story that would protect herself and destroy this family's faith in justice. Marcus grabbed the intercom with shaking hands, his voice urgent as it crackled through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any additional medical professionals on board, please identify yourselves to the flight crew immediately. We have a medical emergency. Dr. Chin worked quickly, using towels from the galley to create a makeshift splint while trying to keep Kennedy as calm as possible. Sweetheart, I know it hurts. You're doing so well. We're going to take care of you. But even as he worked, Patricia pulled Marcus aside again, her voice low but not quite low enough. Her whisper carried to at least 3 rows of passengers who leaned forward to hear what the flight attendant was saying. Marcus, listen to me. These kids have been unsupervised all flight. I've been watching them. The older one couldn't control her sister. They've been loud, disruptive. This incident, this is their fault, not ours. We need to document that the girl was non-compliant with posted safety regulations before this turns into a lawsuit against the airline. Marcus stared at her, his face showing a mixture of horror and disbelief. Patricia, she's a child. She's 9 years old and she's in agony. How can you even think about covering yourself right now? Patricia's expression hardened. I'm thinking about protecting both of us, Marcus. I'm thinking about our jobs, our pensions, our futures. Do you know what happens when a passenger gets injured on a flight? Do you know how corporate investigates these things? They look for fault. They look for liability. And if we don't establish right now that this child violated safety protocols, it's going to come back on us. She violated safety protocols? Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly. She's 9 years old reaching for napkins during turbulence. And you were on your phone not watching where you were going. I saw you, Patricia. Patricia's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Are you really going to take their side over mine? After I trained you? After I helped you get this position? Think very carefully about what you're saying and who you're saying it to. The threat was implicit but clear. Marcus was black. Patricia was white and senior. In the hierarchy of the airline and in the broader world they lived in, her word would carry more weight than his. And she was reminding him of that power dynamic, reminding him that speaking truth could cost him everything. I'm on the side of a hurt child, Marcus said quietly, but he looked away, and Patricia knew she'd successfully intimidated him into at least partial silence. She turned her attention to Skylar, her voice shifting to something that sounded professional and concerned but had an edge of accusation underneath. Honey, I need you to tell me where your parents are. Why are 2 children your age flying alone without proper adult supervision? Do you understand that this situation, this injury, this never would have happened if there had been a responsible adult managing you two? The implication was devastating. Not just that the injury was Kennedy's fault for being out of her seat, but that it was their mother's fault for not being there. That it was a parenting failure. That black mothers who have to work can't properly care for their children. That these girls, by virtue of flying alone, were somehow asking for trouble. Skylar looked up at Patricia with tears streaming down her face and rage building underneath her grief. We have unaccompanied minor documentation. We checked in properly. My mom is an ER nurse who's working a double shift to support us. We're going to visit our grandmother who just had surgery. We did everything right. You hurt my sister. You weren't watching where you were going. This is your fault. Patricia's face flushed but her voice remained cold. Young lady, I understand you're upset. But the facts are clear. Your sister was out of her seat during posted seatbelt sign illumination. That's a federal aviation regulation violation. I was performing my duties checking the cabin. She ran into me. These are the facts that will be in my incident report. The white businessman from 11D nodded along, backing up Patricia's version. Like I said, I saw the whole thing. The kid was running around. The flight attendant was just doing her job. This is what happens when children aren't properly controlled. A younger black woman in seat 15B who'd been watching everything unfold finally found her voice. That's not what happened. I saw you on your phone. You weren't watching. You crashed into that baby at full speed. Patricia turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but you're mistaken. Perhaps from your viewing angle it appeared differently. But I can assure you, I was performing standard safety checks when the child violated regulations and collided with me. The way Patricia said it, with such professional certainty, with such absolute conviction, made even some passengers who'd seen the truth start to question their own eyes. This is how authority gaslights. This is how power rewrites reality in real time. Kennedy's screams had subsided to agonized whimpering now, her body exhausted from pain and shock. Dr. Chin looked up at Marcus with urgency. We need to land this plane. She needs surgery. Both bones are completely fractured. The longer we wait, the more risk of permanent damage. Marcus nodded and moved toward the cockpit to inform the captain. As he walked away, Patricia called after him. Marcus, remember what we discussed. Document everything. Make sure the report is accurate about what really happened here. The emphasis she put on accurate made her meaning clear. Make sure the report protects us. A flight attendant from business class, an older white woman named Susan, came back to assist. She took one look at Kennedy on the floor and her face showed genuine compassion. "Oh honey, oh sweetheart," she said, kneeling beside the child. "You're going to be okay. We're getting you help." Patricia pulled Susan aside as well, briefing her on the situation with her carefully constructed version of events. The child was non-compliant, violated the seatbelt sign, caused the collision. We need to make sure all crew are aligned on what happened before we land and before any investigations begin. Susan looked at Patricia, then at Kennedy crying on the floor, then back at Patricia. Her expression suggested she didn't entirely believe the story she was being told. But she nodded slowly, choosing not to challenge a senior colleague, choosing comfort over confrontation, choosing to go along rather than risk conflict. This is how systems of oppression perpetuate themselves. Not just through the Patricia Kowalskis who actively harm, but through the Susans who stay quiet, the passengers who record but don't speak, the Marcus who want to do right but are intimidated into silence. The collective choice of comfort over courage, of self-preservation over protection of the vulnerable. And if you're watching this story unfold and you haven't subscribed to this channel that exposes these injustices and holds systems accountable, ask yourself why. Every view without a subscription is another person who witnessed harm but didn't act. Don't be another silent bystander. Subscribe now. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional and calm. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Charlotte, North Carolina. We'll be on the ground in approximately 12 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Kennedy heard this through her haze of pain and fear. "Charlotte?" She whimpered. "But Grandma's in Boston. We have to get to Grandma." Skylar stroked her sister's hair with a shaking hand. "We will, Kenny. We will. They just need to fix your arm first." But Skylar's mind was racing with logistics and fear. Their mother was unreachable in surgery. Their father hadn't spoken to them in months. They were about to land in a strange city with Kennedy badly injured and no adults they knew to help them. And this flight attendant who'd hurt Kennedy was already building a story that made it all Kennedy's fault. Skylar had never felt so alone, so powerless, so terrified in her entire 14 years. She was supposed to be the responsible one, the one in charge, the one who kept Kennedy safe. And she'd failed. Her baby sister was broken and it was happening on her watch. The plane began its descent into Charlotte, every bit of turbulence making Kennedy cry out in fresh pain despite Dr. Chen's careful stabilization of her arm. Passengers around them fell silent, the reality of a child's suffering cutting through their desire to look away or minimize or blame. But Patricia Kowalski remained standing near row 14, her expression set, her story prepared, already thinking 3 steps ahead to how she'd protect herself when investigators started asking questions. She had no idea that Kennedy's father was about to receive a phone call that would end her career and expose a pattern of racial targeting she'd been allowed to perpetrate for nearly 2 decades. She had no idea that her carefully constructed lies were about to collide with someone who had the power and resources to demand truth. She had no idea that breaking a black child's arm and then blaming her for it was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. The plane touched down in Charlotte with a jolt that made Kennedy scream. Emergency vehicles were already waiting on the tarmac, their lights flashing red and blue through the windows. The moment the aircraft came to a stop, paramedics boarded with a stretcher and professional urgency. The lead paramedic, a black woman in her 40s, knelt beside Kennedy and immediately assessed the situation with experienced eyes. "Hey, sweetheart, my name is Angela. I'm going to take really good care of you, okay? Can you tell me your name?" "Kennedy," the child whispered through tears. "Kennedy Jackson." "Okay, Kennedy, we're going to get you to the hospital and fix that arm. You're being so brave." As Angela and her partner carefully positioned Kennedy onto the stretcher, securing her injured arm with professional precision, Kennedy's eyes went wide with panic. "Skylar, don't leave me. Don't leave me." Her voice rose to a scream again, her good hand reaching desperately for her sister. Skylar lunged forward to follow the stretcher down the aisle. "I'm coming, Kenny. I'm right here with you." But Patricia Kowalski stepped directly into her path, physically blocking the aisle with her body. Her voice was professional and firm. "I'm sorry, but only a legal guardian can accompany a minor in the ambulance. You're 14. That makes you a minor as well. You'll need to stay on the aircraft until we can contact your parents." Skylar's face contorted with desperation and rage. "She's my sister. I promised my mom I'd stay with her. You can't separate us." Patricia's expression didn't soften. She looked at this 14-year-old black girl and saw liability, saw complication, saw someone whose suffering was less important than following procedures that protected the airline. Should have thought about that before letting her run wild on my aircraft. Airline policy is airline policy. You'll stay here until we can reach a legal guardian. Marcus stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Patricia, come on. We can make an exception here. Look at her. She needs her sister." Patricia turned to him with ice in her eyes. "Can we make an exception, Marcus? Or do you want to explain to corporate why we bent rules for passengers who've already caused a major incident?" She emphasized the word passengers in a way that made clear she was talking about these black girls specifically, these children she'd already decided were problems rather than victims. The paramedics were moving Kennedy toward the exit now, her screams echoing through the cabin. "Skylar! Skylar, please! I'm coming!" Skylar sobbed, trying to push past Patricia. "Please, she's terrified. She needs me. I'm all she has right now. You should have considered that before you two became a disruption on this flight," Patricia said coldly. She physically held Skylar back as the paramedics carried Kennedy off the plane. The sound of Kennedy's screams fading down the jetway was something that would haunt Skylar for years. The image of her baby sister's good hand reaching back desperately, her face twisted in terror and pain, being carried away by strangers while Skylar stood powerless to help her. Skylar's legs gave out. She collapsed right there in the aisle, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, her entire body shaking. Everything she'd promised her mother, every reassurance she'd given Kennedy, every bit of responsibility she'd tried to carry, it all crashed down on her in that moment of absolute failure. The white woman from seat 13B, the one who'd tried to defend them earlier, knelt beside Skylar and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Sweetheart, this is wrong. This is so wrong. Where are your parents? Can we call someone?" Skylar could barely speak through her sobs. "My mom's in surgery in Atlanta. She's been in the OR for hours. I can't reach her. I've tried. What about your father? Another family member? Someone who can help you?" Skylar's face crumpled further. "My dad," she whispered. "But I haven't talked to him in 2 months. We had a fight. He chose his job over us. I was so mad at him. But Kennedy needs him. She needs him, and I don't know if he'll even answer my call." "Call him," the woman urged gently. "Whatever happened between you two, call him now. Your sister needs him." Patricia stood over them, her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she was barely tolerating this emotional display. "The girl will be taken to Atrium Health Carolina's medical center. You'll be able to see her once we reach your legal guardian and make proper arrangements. Now please return to your seats so we can deplane the other passengers." The casual cruelty of it, the complete lack of compassion for 2 children who'd just been traumatized, was breathtaking. Patricia had broken Kennedy's arm through her own negligence, had blamed a 9-year-old for being injured, had separated terrified sisters during a medical emergency. And now she was annoyed that Skylar was crying in the aisle and delaying her schedule. Skylar let the woman from 13B help her back to her seat. She sat there shaking, surrounded by passengers who were gathering their belongings and pretending they hadn't just witnessed a child being ripped away from her sister while screaming in terror. Marcus appeared beside her with a bottle of water and a paper bag with some snacks. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This isn't right. Here's my number. If you need anything, if there's any way I can help." Skylar took the paper with his number written on it but couldn't even look at him. He'd known it was wrong. He'd seen Patricia on her phone. He'd watched the collision. But he hadn't stood up to Patricia when it mattered. His kindness now felt like too little, too late. She was escorted off the plane by a gate agent who looked at her with thinly veiled suspicion, as if Skylar were a problem to be managed rather than a traumatized child who needed support. She was taken to a small office in the terminal and told to wait there while they tried to contact her parents. Alone in that sterile room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, Skylar pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She tried her mother first. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. 3 times. Nothing. Her mother was still in surgery, still unreachable, still had no idea that Kennedy was hurt and alone and terrified. Skylar scrolled through her contacts until she reached the one labeled Dad James Jackson. Her thumb hovered over it. 2 months of silence. 2 months of ignoring his calls because she was angry at him for missing her debate tournament, for choosing a board meeting over her 8th grade graduation, for always putting his airline before his family. But Kennedy loved him. Kennedy called him every week. Kennedy forgave him for everything because she was 9 and still believed Daddy could fix anything. And maybe, just maybe, their daddy could fix this. With shaking fingers, Skylar pressed call. 75 minutes after Skylar's call, James Jackson's private jet touched down at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. He deplaned into a waiting SUV flanked by his legal team, head of operations, head of HR, and private security. His face was set in an expression his executives had learned to fear, the look that preceded swift and devastating action. Inside the terminal, he found Skylar exactly where she'd said she'd be, still in that sterile office, still crying, still being watched by a gate agent who looked at her like she was a problem to contain rather than a traumatized child. The moment Skylar saw her father, she launched herself at him, collapsing into his arms with sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm here now, baby," James whispered, holding her tight. "I'm here. You're not alone anymore." He pulled back to look at her face, his hands on her shoulders. "Did anyone hurt you? Did Patricia put her hands on you? Did anyone touch you inappropriately?" Skylar shook her head. "Just Kennedy. Just Kenny. Dad, we need to get to her. She's been alone for over an hour. She must be so scared." "We're going right now," James promised. "But first I need 60 seconds. He turned to the gate agent who'd been supervising Skylar, his voice cold and commanding. "Where is Flight 2156? The agent checked her computer. "Still at the gate, sir. Passengers have deplaned, but the crew is still on board completing incident reports." James turned to his head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb. "Lock it down. Nobody leaves that aircraft. I want statements from every crew member before they go anywhere. And I want the captain's black box data, maintenance logs, and all surveillance footage pulled immediately." "Sir," his CO Jennifer Chin interjected carefully. "The crew has rights. We need to follow proper procedures." "The proper procedure is that my daughter has 2 broken bones," James said, his voice dropping to dangerous quiet. "The proper procedure is that one of our employees was negligent, injured a child, and then tried to cover it up with lies. The proper procedure is that I'm the CEO of this airline and I'm telling you to lock down that aircraft and get me every piece of evidence before it disappears." Jennifer nodded and began making calls. James's head of HR, Patricia Owens, a black woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for 20 years, approached with her tablet. "Sir, there's something you need to know about Patricia Kowalski before we go any further." Her voice was hesitant, the tone of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. "Tell me," James said. "She has a history," Patricia Owens said quietly, pulling up files on her tablet. 7 formal complaints filed against her in 18 years of service. 5 of those complaints involve passengers of color. James took the tablet and began scrolling, his expression growing darker with each entry he read. His legal team gathered around to look over his shoulder, and Skylar, still clutching her father's arm, watched as the adults processed information that made them all go silent. 2019. Patricia Kowalski accused a 17-year-old black male passenger of threatening behavior when he asked for extra snacks during a 5-hour flight. The passenger's mother filed a complaint. Investigation revealed the teen had type 1 diabetes and was experiencing low blood sugar. Outcome: additional sensitivity training for Kowalski. 2020, Patricia Kowalski demanded to see proof of ticket purchase from a Latino family seated in first class, suggesting their tickets might be fraudulent. The family had purchased the tickets legitimately 3 months prior. Outcome, verbal warning and additional training. 2021. Patricia Kowalski called security on a Middle Eastern man for suspicious activity. He was praying quietly in his seat before takeoff. The incident was recorded by multiple passengers and went viral on social media. Outcome, 2-week suspension and mandatory religious sensitivity training. 2022, Patricia Kowalski refused to serve a black woman in business class, claiming she appeared intoxicated. The woman was actually experiencing symptoms of diabetic hypoglycemia. Outcome, written warning and additional medical training. James looked up from the tablet, his face showing barely controlled rage. Every single incident was noted, investigated minimally, and resulted in training. Additional training. Sensitivity training. Religious training. Medical training. Never termination. Never serious consequences. Never real accountability. We enabled this, James said, his voice hollow. We documented a pattern of racial bias and we responded with training sessions and warnings. And then we let her keep working. We let her keep interacting with passengers. We gave her chance after chance while she targeted people of color again and again. Sir, the incidents were spaced out over years, Jennifer tried to explain. Each one was investigated individually. The pattern wasn't. The pattern was there, James interrupted. We just chose not to see it. Or we saw it and decided it wasn't serious enough to act on. And now my daughter is in a hospital with broken bones because we failed to protect passengers from an employee who should have been terminated years ago. Skylar looked up at her father, seeing him process his company's complicity in Kennedy's injury. Seeing him understand that this wasn't just one bad employee but a systemic failure that had been building for years. Dad, she said quietly, can we please go to Kennedy now? Yes, James said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Yes, baby. Let's go get your sister. But first, he turned to his security chief. Pull the surveillance footage from Flight 2156. All angles. I want to see exactly what happened during that collision. Already on it, Marcus Webb said, his laptop open and connected to the airline's security system. He pulled up multiple camera angles from the cabin of Flight 2156 and began scrubbing through the footage until he found the timestamp. They all watched in silence as the video played. Kennedy standing, reaching toward the overhead bin. The turbulence hitting. Kennedy stumbling. And then Patricia Kowalski, clearly visible on multiple angles, walking down the aisle with her phone in her hand, her eyes on the screen, her attention completely diverted from watching where she was going. The collision played out in horrifying detail. Patricia slamming into Kennedy at full speed. Kennedy flying backward. The sickening moment of impact with the armrest. Kennedy's scream. But what happened next was even more damning. Patricia scrambling to her feet, looking at Kennedy on the floor, looking around at the passengers, and then her eyes found one of the overhead cameras. She stared directly at it for 2 full seconds, as if calculating, before she deliberately stepped back and announced loudly for all the cabin to hear and for the camera to record, the seatbelt sign is on. You should be seated. She was building her defense, Skylar whispered. Right there. While Kennedy was screaming. She was already deciding to blame her. James watched the footage 3 times, his jaw clenched tighter with each viewing. She was on her phone. She wasn't watching. She caused the collision. And then she immediately started constructing a narrative to protect herself. He looked at his legal team. Is this enough? The head lawyer nodded grimly. This is negligence. This is a clear violation of duty of care. Combined with her history of complaints, this is terminable offense and potential criminal liability. Then terminate her, James said. Effective immediately. And I want our legal team to determine if we're pursuing criminal charges for child endangerment and filing false reports. Sir, Jennifer interjected. We need to follow proper termination procedures. Union contracts. I don't care about union contracts right now, James said. My priority is getting to my daughter. But the moment I walk out of this airport, I want Patricia Kowalski's employment terminated and I want a full investigation launched into why we allowed this pattern to continue for 18 years. He took Skylar's hand. Come on, baby girl. Let's go find Kennedy. The drive to Atrium Health Carolina's medical center took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Skylar sat in the back of the SUV next to her father, her hand gripping his so tightly her knuckles went white. James kept his other hand on his phone, reading through Patricia Kowalski's complete personnel file that his HR team was sending him in real time. The more he read, the sicker he felt. Not just 7 complaints. 7 formal complaints that had been documented. But dozens of informal complaints from passengers that had been noted in comment cards and customer service interactions but never officially investigated. Passengers who'd felt discriminated against but hadn't known how to escalate. Passengers who'd filed complaints that got lost in bureaucratic processes. One comment card from 2018 caught his attention. A black mother traveling with her young son had written, "Flight attendant Patricia was rude and dismissive to me and my child while being friendly and helpful to white passengers around us. When my son asked for apple juice, she told him they were out. 5 minutes later, I watched her serve apple juice to a white child 2 rows up. When I politely mentioned this, she told me I was being difficult. My son is 6 years old and he felt the difference in how she treated him. This broke my heart." The comment had been filed, noted, and resulted in no action whatsoever. James closed his eyes, the weight of his company's failures pressing down on him. How many passengers had been mistreated? How many children had been made to feel less than? How many families had experienced discrimination on his airline while he was focused on quarterly earnings and expansion plans? "We should have caught this," he said quietly to Patricia Owens, his HR director. "How did we miss this pattern for so long?" Patricia's voice was careful but honest. "Sir, we didn't miss it. We saw it. But each incident was treated in isolation. Training was seen as sufficient response. And frankly, the complaints came from passengers of color against a white employee with seniority. The system wasn't designed to protect them. It was designed to protect her. That ends today," James said. "Everything about how we handle discrimination complaints changes today." They pulled up to the hospital and James and Skylar rushed through the emergency entrance. After identifying themselves and providing documentation, they were led to a private room where Kennedy lay in a hospital bed, her left arm in a temporary splint and sling, in 4 drip in her right arm, her face swollen and tear-stained. The moment Kennedy saw them, she let out a cry that broke James's heart. "Daddy! Skylar!" James rushed to her bedside, careful not to jostle her injured arm as he wrapped her in as much of a hug as he could manage. "Baby girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Kennedy sobbed into his chest. "The lady said it was my fault. She said I was bad. Everyone was looking at me like I did something wrong and it hurt so much and they took me away from Skylar and I was so scared, Daddy. I was so scared." Skylar climbed onto the other side of the bed, taking Kennedy's good hand in both of hers. "I'm here now, Kenny. I'm not leaving you again. I promise." A doctor entered the room, a South Asian woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a grave expression. "Mr. Jackson? I'm Dr. Patel. I performed Kennedy's surgery. How is she?" James asked, though he could see from the doctor's face that the news wasn't all good. "The surgery was successful. We've set both the radius and ulna fractures with pins and plates. But I need to be honest with you about the long-term prognosis." She pulled up X-rays on her tablet. The fractures were severe. Compound breaks with significant trauma to the surrounding tissue. Kennedy is going to need extensive physical therapy, minimum 6 months, possibly longer. "Will she fully recover?" James asked. Dr. Patel hesitated. "There's a possibility of permanent reduced mobility in her left hand. The nerve damage from the impact was significant. We won't know the full extent until she's had several months of therapy, but families need to be prepared that she may not regain full dexterity." "Kennedy's left hand," James said quietly, looking at his daughter. "Kennedy's drawing hand." "I love to draw," Kennedy said to Dr. Patel, her voice small and scared. "I want to be an animator. I draw every day. Will I be able to draw again?" Dr. Patel's expression was compassionate but realistic. "You'll be able to use your hand. But fine motor control, the kind needed for detailed drawing, that may be significantly impaired. We're going to work very hard in therapy to preserve as much function as possible. But I want you to understand that your hand may not work exactly the way it did before. Kennedy's face crumbled. So the lady who hurt me, she took away my drawing? She took away the thing I love most? No one answered because there was no good answer. Patricia Kowalski's negligence had potentially stolen Kennedy's dream. Had maybe ended her ability to pursue animation. Had robbed a 9-year-old of the talent and passion that defined her. James felt rage building in his chest, so intense it took everything in him to keep his voice calm and steady. Dr. Patel, whatever Kennedy needs, whatever therapy, whatever specialists, whatever equipment, cost is not a factor. We're getting her the absolute best care available. Of course, Dr. Patel said. We'll set up a comprehensive therapy plan. But Mr. Jackson, I need to tell you something else. Kennedy has been asking me the same question over and over since she arrived. What question? James asked. Dr. Patel looked at Kennedy with deep sympathy. She keeps asking if what happened to her was because she's black. The question hung in the air, devastating in its clarity. A 9-year-old child, lying in a hospital bed with broken bones, had already learned enough about the world to wonder if her race was why an adult had hurt her and then blamed her for it. Kennedy looked up at her father with tear-filled eyes. Was it Daddy? Did that lady hurt me because I'm black? Is that why she said it was my fault? James sat on the edge of Kennedy's bed, his hand gently stroking her hair, trying to find words that were honest but wouldn't destroy her. Baby girl, I think that lady has hurt a lot of people. And I think she's hurt a lot of people who look like us. And I think she got away with it for a long time because the people who should have stopped her didn't. But that's not on you. That's on us. That's on me. And I'm going to make sure she never hurts another child again. His phone buzzed. A message from his legal team. Patricia Kowalski is giving media interviews. Claiming she's the victim. Says your daughter attacked her. James's jaw clenched as he pulled up the video link they'd sent. There was Patricia, sitting in her living room, makeup perfect, expression one of wounded innocence. I'm devastated by what happened, she told the interviewer. But I need people to understand I was just doing my job. That child ran into me during severe turbulence. I was trying to ensure passenger safety when she collided with me. And now I'm being targeted, I'm being attacked, because the CEO's daughter was involved. This is a witch hunt. I'm the real victim here. James watched the entire 5-minute interview, his expression growing colder with each passing second. Patricia positioned herself as the wronged employee, suggested Kennedy had been running wild, implied the girls had been unsupervised and out of control. She used every dog whistle, every coded phrase, painting herself as the professional trying to do her job while being victimized by difficult passengers who happened to be black. The comments section was already filling with support for Patricia. Kids these days have no discipline. Where were the parents? She's right, she's being targeted because of who the father is. This is what happens when you let children fly alone. James made a decision in that moment. Patricia wanted to play this in the media? Fine. He'd give her media attention. But she was about to learn what happened when lies collided with documented truth and a father with resources to expose every bit of it. James Jackson didn't sleep that night. While Kennedy dozed fitfully under pain medication and Skylar curled up in a chair beside her sister's bed refusing to leave, James sat in the hospital waiting room with his laptop and his legal team, preparing a response that would detonate across media and expose Patricia Kowalski's lies in the most public, devastating way possible. By 6 a.m., he'd made his decision. No corporate PR spin. No carefully worded statements filtered through lawyers worried about liability. Just raw, unfiltered truth. He posted the full surveillance footage from Flight 2156 on his personal social media accounts, unedited, with timestamps and audio intact. The caption was simple and devastating. This is what really happened to my 9-year-old daughter Kennedy Jackson on Meridian Global Flight 2156. This is the employee who was on her phone instead of watching where she was going. This is the collision that broke both bones in my daughter's forearm. And this is the woman who then blamed a child to cover her own negligence. Watch the entire video. Then decide who the real victim is. The video went viral within hours. By noon it had 15 million views. By evening it was trending #1 worldwide. But James didn't stop there. With his legal team's careful redaction of other passengers' identifying information, he released Patricia Kowalski's personnel file showing her 18-year pattern of complaints, focusing specifically on the 5 incidents involving passengers of color. He included the internal emails showing management had been aware of the pattern and had responded only with training, never with real consequences. The response was explosive and immediate. Major news outlets picked up the story. Civil rights organizations issued statements calling for federal investigations. The hashtag Justice for Kennedy trended in over 40 countries. Other passengers who'd experienced discrimination from Patricia began coming forward with their own stories, adding to the mountain of evidence showing this wasn't an isolated incident but a career-spanning pattern of racial bias. The FAA launched a formal inquiry into Meridian Global Airlines' handling of discrimination complaints. The Department of Transportation opened an investigation. Congressional representatives called for hearings on discrimination in the airline industry. Patricia Kowalski was terminated within 24 hours of James's posts going viral. Her airline union, facing massive pressure from its own members threatening to strike if they defended her, dropped her representation. She was criminally charged with child endangerment for her negligence in the collision, filing false reports for her attempts to blame Kennedy, and civil rights violations for her pattern of discriminatory behavior. Her lawyer tried to mount a defense, tried to claim she was being scapegoated, tried to paint her as a victim of political correctness and corporate overreach. But the surveillance footage was undeniable. Her own personnel file was damning. And public opinion had turned completely against her. What the criminal charges couldn't capture, what the viral videos couldn't show, was the daily reality of Kennedy's suffering in the months that followed. 3 times a week, Kennedy endured physical therapy sessions that left her in tears. The therapist, a patient woman named Maria, worked with Kennedy on grip exercises, fine motor skills, range of motion drills. But progress was agonizingly slow and frustratingly limited. Kennedy would sit at the table trying to hold a pencil, trying to make the controlled movements that had once come so naturally to her, and her hand would shake. The muscles wouldn't respond the way her brain told them to. The nerve damage made her fingers feel both numb and painfully hypersensitive at the same time. She'd cry through sessions, frustrated and devastated as she watched her ability to draw slip further away. The detailed character sketches she used to create with ease now looked shaky and childish. The smooth lines she'd been so proud of came out jagged and uncontrolled. Her art teacher at school tried to be encouraging, but Kennedy could see the pity in her eyes. Could hear the difference in the praise that used to be genuine and was now just kind. Could feel herself becoming the student people felt sorry for instead of the talented artist they'd admired. Skylar went to every therapy session, holding Kennedy's good hand, encouraging her through the tears, helping her with homework when her injured hand made writing difficult. The bond between the sisters, already strong, became unbreakable. They'd survived something traumatic together, and they protected each other fiercely in the aftermath. James restructured his entire life and priorities. He stepped back from day-to-day operations at Meridian Global, promoting his COO to handle most executive decisions while he focused on being present for his daughters. Every therapy appointment, every school event, every moment he'd missed before. He and Monica, despite their divorce, formed a united front for their daughter's healing. They attended Kennedy's appointments together, coordinated care, supported each other through the fear and grief of watching their child suffer. One night, about 6 months after the injury, Kennedy asked the question that had been haunting her. "Daddy, why did she hurt me? I keep trying to understand. Was it really because I'm black?" James pulled her close, careful of her still healing arm. "Baby girl, some people carry hate in their hearts. And Patricia Kowalski is someone who carried that hate for a very long time. She looked at passengers who looked like us and she saw problems instead of people. She saw threats instead of children. And she got away with treating people badly because the company I built didn't hold her accountable. So it was because I'm black?" Kennedy said quietly. "It was because she's racist," James corrected gently. "That's her failure, not yours. That's her hate, not your fault. You were a scared little girl trying to clean up a spill during turbulence. Everything that happened after that, every bit of pain you've suffered, that's on her. Never on you." But I can't draw anymore, Kennedy whispered. She took away the thing I loved most. You can still draw, James said. It's different now, harder now, but you're adapting. I've seen your digital work. I've seen you learning new tools. You're not giving up on your dreams, baby. You're just finding new ways to reach them. Kennedy nodded, but James could see the grief in her eyes. Could see that no amount of reassurance would fully heal the wound of having her talent stolen by someone's negligence and hate. Then his phone buzzed with a news alert. Patricia Kowalski had given another jailhouse interview, her last attempt to control the narrative before her trial. James pulled up the video with growing anger. Patricia sat across from an interviewer, her prison jumpsuit somehow still pressed and neat, her expression one of wounded dignity. I'm devastated by what's happened, she said. But people need to understand the full story. I was targeted, attacked, destroyed because I dared to do my job. Those children were unsupervised. They were disruptive. And when an accident happened, I became the scapegoat because their father happens to own the airline. The interviewer pushed back gently. But the surveillance footage clearly shows. The footage shows what James Jackson wants people to see, Patricia interrupted. It doesn't show the full context. Those urban children had been problems all flight. Their lack of parental discipline created an unsafe environment. Urban children. Lack of parental discipline. The dog whistles were barely coded at all. I'm the real victim here, Patricia continued. I've lost my career, my reputation, my freedom. And for what? For trying to maintain safety standards? For holding passengers accountable to rules? This is reverse racism. This is what happens when political correctness runs amok. James watched the entire interview, his jaw clenched, and made one final decision. Patricia wanted to claim victimhood? He'd show the world what real victims looked like. The trial of Patricia Kowalski began 14 months after she broke Kennedy Jackson's arm. The prosecution presented the surveillance footage, showing frame by frame Patricia texting while walking, the collision at full speed, Kennedy's body flying backward, and Patricia's calculated performance for the cameras afterward. They presented her personnel file with its damning pattern of 7 formal complaints over 18 years, 5 targeting passengers of color. They brought forward passengers from previous flights who testified about her discriminatory behavior, her microaggressions, her different treatment of black and brown travelers versus white passengers. The defense tried desperately to paint Patricia as a dedicated professional victimized by political correctness. Her lawyer emphasized her 18 years of service, her clean safety record aside from this incident, her dedication to passenger safety. But when Patricia took the stand, she destroyed any remaining sympathy. Under cross-examination, she couldn't help herself. The coded language slipped through. References to unsupervised urban children. Comments about lack of parental discipline. Suggestions that certain passengers required more scrutiny and firmer boundaries. The prosecutor, a black woman named Angela Morrison, pressed her relentlessly. Ms. Kowalski, in your 18-year career, how many white children flying as unaccompanied minors did you have removed from flights for safety violations? Patricia hesitated. I don't recall specific numbers. Let me help you. The answer is 0. But you've been involved in 5 incidents with children of color. Can you explain that pattern? Each situation was different, Patricia said defensively. Each child presented unique challenges. Unique challenges, Angela repeated. Is that what you call a 9-year-old girl reaching for napkins during turbulence? A unique challenge that required you to blame her for injuries you caused? I was doing my job, Patricia insisted, her voice rising. Those girls had been problems all flight. If their mother had been there properly supervising them instead of. Instead of what, Ms. Kowalski? Angela's voice was sharp. Instead of working as an ER nurse to support her family? Please, finish that thought. Tell this jury exactly what you think about black single mothers. The jury, carefully selected to be diverse and representative, watched Patricia's mask slip completely. Watched her reveal the contempt she'd been hiding behind professional language. Watched her demonstrate exactly the bias that had led her to hurt Kennedy and then blame her. The defense tried to recover during redirect, but the damage was done. Patricia Kowalski had shown the jury who she really was. Closing arguments were devastating. Angela Morrison stood before the jury with Kennedy's medical records, with photographs of her injuries, with testimony from Dr. Patel about the permanent nerve damage. Patricia Kowalski had 18 years to change, Angela said. 18 years during which Meridian Global Airlines documented her pattern of discrimination and responded with training instead of termination. 18 years during which she learned she could target passengers of color without real consequences. And on March 15th of last year, that pattern of discrimination collided with a 9-year-old child and broke both bones in her forearm. She held up the surveillance footage framed at the moment of impact. This is negligence. This is child endangerment. This is an adult so focused on her phone that she didn't watch where she was going. And when faced with the consequences of her actions, she immediately blamed the victim. She blamed Kennedy Jackson, a terrified 9-year-old in agony, rather than take responsibility for her failure. Angela walked to where Kennedy sat with her family, her left arm still in a specialized brace. Kennedy Jackson loved to draw. She dreamed of being an animator. She spent hours creating detailed sketches of characters and stories. And Patricia Kowalski took that from her. The nerve damage is permanent. Kennedy will never have full dexterity in her left hand again. Her dream has been stolen by someone who couldn't be bothered to watch where she was walking. She turned back to the jury. This isn't just about one collision. This is about a system that enabled Patricia Kowalski to harm passengers for nearly 2 decades without real accountability. This is about a pattern of racial bias that Meridian Global Airlines documented but failed to stop. And this is about a child whose only crime was being black in a space where Patricia Kowalski decided she didn't belong. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all charges. Guilty of child endangerment. Guilty of filing false reports. Guilty of civil rights violations. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, an older black man who'd spent his career fighting discrimination, looked at Patricia with barely concealed contempt. Ms. Kowalski, you had numerous opportunities to change your behavior. Your employer documented a pattern of discrimination and gave you chance after chance. You responded by continuing to target passengers of color, culminating in an incident where you seriously injured a child and then attempted to destroy her reputation to cover your negligence. He sentenced her to 3 years in prison, the maximum allowed under the charges. Additionally, he ordered her to pay $3.8 million in damages to the Jackson family. And he issued a permanent ban preventing her from ever working in any transportation industry again. Patricia showed no remorse even then. As she was led away in handcuffs, she muttered to her lawyer loud enough for the gallery to hear. "This is a witch hunt. I'm the real victim. They destroyed me for being white and doing my job." But Patricia Kowalski's conviction didn't erase Kennedy's trauma or restore her hand's function. It didn't give back the dreams that had been stolen. It didn't heal the psychological scars of being blamed for her own injury. Kennedy still had nightmares where she was falling and no one caught her. She'd wake up crying, her arm aching phantom pains where the brakes had been. She flinched when flight attendants approached. Avoided drawing in front of people because her shaking hand embarrassed her. Her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in childhood trauma, worked with Kennedy on processing what had happened. On understanding that the injury wasn't her fault. On managing the PTSD symptoms that manifested in hypervigilance and anxiety. But healing from trauma isn't linear. Some days Kennedy felt strong, felt like she was adapting and moving forward. Other days the grief of what she'd lost overwhelmed her completely. James, true to his word, implemented sweeping changes across Meridian Global Airlines. Kennedy's law became the industry standard. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Independent review boards for every complaint involving race, religion, ethnicity, or any protected class. Immediate suspension for any employee with patterns of bias. Mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias training quarterly instead of as punishment. Most importantly, he implemented radical transparency. Every discrimination complaint filed against Meridian Global staff was now documented in annual public reports showing what happened, how it was investigated, and what actions were taken. No more complaints disappearing into bureaucratic black holes. No more patterns being ignored because each incident was treated in isolation. Other airlines, facing pressure from civil rights organizations and the threat of federal regulation, began adopting similar protocols. The Jackson case became a landmark in aviation civil rights law. Patricia Kowalski's conviction sent a message to airline employees nationwide that discriminating against passengers carried real consequences. But for Kennedy, those systemic changes felt distant from her daily reality of struggling to hold a pencil without her hand shaking. 3 years after the injury, Kennedy was 12 years old. Her arm had healed as much as it ever would. The scars from surgery were faded white lines running up her forearm. The nerve damage was permanent. Dr. Patel had been right. Kennedy would never have full dexterity again. But Kennedy had done something remarkable. She'd adapted. Unable to draw with the precision she once had using traditional pencils, she discovered digital art tools. Stylus pens that didn't require the same grip strength. Drawing tablets with pressure sensitivity that compensated for her reduced control. Software that could smooth lines and correct mistakes. She'd created a viral comic series called The Girl Who Fell about a young superhero who gained powers from surviving trauma. The main character looked like Kennedy, brown-skinned and brave, with a scarred arm that glowed when she used her abilities. The comic dealt with PTSD, with recovery, with finding strength in survival. It had hundreds of thousands of followers online. Kennedy had been interviewed by art websites, featured in articles about young artists overcoming adversity. She discovered that while she couldn't draw exactly the way she used to, she could create art that mattered, that resonated, that helped other kids who'd survived trauma feel less alone. Skylar was 17 now, finishing her senior year of high school with acceptance letters from multiple prestigious universities. She'd chosen Howard University to study civil rights law. Her application essay had been about watching her sister suffer, about learning that the legal system moves slowly even when justice is clear, about wanting to be the kind of lawyer who protects vulnerable people from those who abuse power. And if you've watched Kennedy's entire story, felt the injustice and the pain and the slow grinding path to partial justice, but you haven't liked this video or subscribed to this channel, you need to ask yourself why. This platform exposes the discrimination that airlines and corporations hope will stay hidden. Every like pushes these stories to more people. Every subscription supports accountability. If you truly stand against racism and child abuse disguised as policy enforcement, prove it. Don't just watch. Like and subscribe now. James Jackson was transformed by what happened to his daughters. He spoke at conferences on corporate accountability and systemic racism. He testified before Congress about the need for stronger protections against discrimination in air travel. He donated millions to organizations fighting for civil rights and supporting survivors of racial trauma. But more than any of that, he'd become present. The father who'd always prioritized business was now the father who showed up, who knew his daughter's friends and teachers and dreams, who'd learned that success meant nothing if his children paid the price for it. He kept a photograph in his office of Kennedy post-surgery, her arm in the massive cast from shoulder to fingertips, Skylar beside her holding her good hand, both girls wearing their butterfly necklaces. Kennedy's handwriting underneath, shaky from using her non-dominant hand, read, "We survived because we fought back." Patricia Kowalski served her sentence in a North Carolina women's prison. Her appeals were denied at every level. Her family disowned her after the trial, unable to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the pattern of racism the evidence had revealed. She gave occasional jailhouse interviews claiming she'd been canceled, claiming she was the victim of reverse racism, claiming the system had destroyed her for being white. No one listened. Her name had become synonymous with the kind of everyday racism that hides behind professionalism and policy. She was featured in training videos as an example of what not to do, how bias manifests in microaggressions and escalates to harm. But Kennedy's story echoed far beyond one family or one convicted flight attendant. It became required reading in airline training programs. The Jackson protocols were adopted by 6 major carriers. Flight attendant training nationwide added extensive modules on recognizing and confronting implicit bias. Kennedy's case inspired legislation. The Passenger Protection Act, introduced in Congress with bipartisan support, mandated independent oversight of discrimination complaints in transportation and criminalized retaliation against passengers who reported bias. On Kennedy's 12th birthday, a reporter asked her what she wanted people to remember about what happened to her. Kennedy thought carefully before answering, her scarred left hand resting on her drawing tablet. "I want people to know that when they blamed me for being hurt, they were really just showing who they've always been," she said. "Adults who see black kids and assume we're problems instead of children who need protection. And I want other kids who look like me to know something really important. It's never your fault when adults decide you don't matter. It's never your fault when their hate hurts you. That's on them, boys." She paused, then added, "And if it happens to you, fight back. Tell someone. Keep telling people until someone listens. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them steal your voice along with everything else." The reporter asked if she was angry at Patricia Kowalski. Kennedy considered this. "I'm angry at what she took from me. I'm angry that I can't draw the way I used to. I'm angry that I have nightmares and panic attacks. I'm angry that she hurt me and then tried to destroy me by lying. But I'm also grateful for my dad who fought for me. For my sister who never left my side. For Dr. Chen who helped me find new ways to create art. For everyone who saw the truth and stood up for it." She held up her tablet showing her latest comic panel. "Patricia Kowalski tried to break me. She broke my arm. She damaged nerves that'll never fully heal. But she didn't break me. I'm still here. I'm still creating. I'm still dreaming. And I'm using my story to help other kids survive theirs." That response, filmed and shared, became Kennedy's most viral moment. Not the footage of her injury. Not the trial testimony. But her own voice at 12 years old, refusing to be defined by her trauma while acknowledging its reality. 3 years after Patricia Kowalski broke Kennedy Jackson's arm on Flight 2156, justice had been served in the legal sense. Patricia was in prison. The airline had changed its policies. Money had been paid. But Kennedy still lived with permanent nerve damage. Still had PTSD. Still grieved the loss of the effortless way she used to draw. Still carried scars visible and invisible from being hurt and then blamed for that hurt. Some scars are visible. Some are systemic. But both require the same thing to heal. People in power choosing accountability over comfort. Companies choosing justice over profit. Bystanders choosing courage over silence. And fathers choosing their children over empires. James Jackson had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. By almost losing his daughters to a system he'd built but failed to protect them from. Kennedy Jackson had learned different lessons. That racism doesn't just exist in history books. That adults who should protect you might hurt you instead. That your skin color can make people see you as a threat even when you're a terrified 9-year-old reaching for napkins. But she'd also learned that some people fight for you. That truth eventually surfaces even when power tries to bury it. That trauma doesn't have to define you even when it changes you forever. And that sometimes, when the world tries to break you, you break the world's expectations instead by surviving, adapting, and refusing to let hate have the final word. Kennedy Jackson was 12 years old, a survivor of racial discrimination and violence, an artist who'd found new ways to create when the old ways were stolen, and a voice for other children who'd been hurt and blamed for their own pain. And she was still here. Still fighting. Still creating. Still dreaming. That, more than any verdict or policy change, was the real victory.